Well, hey everybody, and welcome to this midweek review with Mr. John. I'm Mr. John, and don't you love it when somebody does something that is not very nice and it comes back to bite them? One of those things like the guy who sits there and says you're picking teams for kickball, and he sits there and says that you can't be on his team because you're not good enough. And all of a sudden, the game gets to going and you kick 3 home runs and you knock in one of the last runs of the game, and he's up and it's the bottom of the 9th of the kickball game and he's got the bases loaded, 2 outs, and he kicks a pop fly to the pitcher. The guy who said you weren't good enough makes the last out, and now he has to sit there and see everybody just kind of watching him. Well, our story in Esther has kind of something like that happen. But before all that happens, if you remember, there was a guy named Mordecai. He was the uncle of Esther who becomes queen. Well, one day Mordecai's out and about, and he's out by the front gates of the town or something like that, and he hears a couple guys, and they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna get the king. We're gonna kill the king. Let's figure a way to get him." And Mordecai overhears these 2 guys plotting and scheming to get the king, and Mordecai goes, "What do I do here?" So Mordecai is a man of God, and he believes in doing the right thing. So he goes to his niece Esther, who's now queen, and tells Queen Esther what he overheard. Queen Esther, in turn, could have kept quiet herself, but she didn't. She did the right thing, and she goes to King Xerxes, if you remember, the Persian king who made Queen Esther queen, and says, "King, my uncle Mordecai overheard a couple guys plotting your death. You need to do something about it." And King Xerxes does. But he also does something that they kind of did back then. They wrote on the scrolls or the annals or whatever you want to call it, and they wrote down what had happened, how Mordecai saved the king. Well, a few years pass, and King Xerxes is still hanging around as the king, and Queen Esther is there. And King Xerxes has adopted this guy named Haman as his right-hand man. Now, Haman was a very prideful man, and he thought he was just the guy, right? So he walks around town, and he expected when he passed you by that you were to bow to him because he had the authority of the king. He was the king's right-hand man. What Haman said he would take to the king, and it shall be done. So you need to revere Haman like the king. So he walked around probably like this, right? And when he walked by people, they would bow. So Haman's walking by this crowd one day, and he's walking by, and he notices there's a guy over there, and he's not bowing. And Haman doesn't like it. He thinks that this guy is just not being friendly to him or honoring him in the way he should. And so he goes over and he finds the man's name out, and it's Mordecai. That's right, it's Mordecai. Mordecai would not bow to Haman because he was a follower of God. And he wasn't going to bow to no man before he would bow to his God, right? He's not going to worship a man like he's his God. And of course, Haman is angry, and now he's plotting. And he goes, and he knows Mordecai's a Jewish man. So he's like, okay, if he's not going to bow to him, I've got to find a way to get to him and maybe even kill him. And not just Mordecai, but those other pesky Jews who will honor their God before me. And that's just not the way it's going to be. Right? So Haman is plotting and plotting. And like I said, this is a few years after Mordecai had got the plot of the guys trying to kill King Xerxes, and now Haman is plotting to kill Mordecai. But meanwhile, in the castle, Xerxes is kind of chilling out and relaxing, maybe has some free time, and he decides to go back and pull up some of the old scrolls and just kind of reread and just kind of remember what has been going on in the past in the town. And he reads the story of how Mordecai saves him. And he's like, man, you know what? We didn't honor Mordecai for what he did for me. He saved my life, by telling the plot. And I'm still around because of Mordecai here. We need to honor him. So King Xerxes calls in Haman. Hey, King Xerxes, come in, or Haman, come in here. And Haman goes, yes, sir. How are you doing, sir? Haman, your number one guy here for you. What should I do for you? And King Xerxes asks him this. Hey, kind of like this. Hey, what would you do in the situation? You got this guy, right? And you think the world of him, and he's done so much for you. What would you do for him? And the prideful Haman probably thought he was talking about him, right? And he did think that. Oh, King, what a great guy you are for honoring this guy that you say is so good. What I would do is I would get him the most righteous princely robes, put them on him. Then I would take this guy and I would put him on a horse and parade him in front of the entire town. This guy would love that. And King Xerxes looks at Haman and goes, wow, that's pretty good, man. That's a good idea. I like it. I need you to go get Mordecai so we can do this. And Haman's like, this guy says what? Right? He's like, what am I supposed to do? What? I gotta do. Oh, man. So he has to go and get Mordecai and pick him up and get him these princely robes, get him on this horse, and he has to walk Mordecai in front of everyone, honoring and celebrating Mordecai for the fact that he saved King Xerxes. Haman is now beside himself. And we'll see Haman a little bit more next week in the stuff he is going to do and wants to do. So, I hope you're following these stories. Esther's such a great book in the Bible, and I hope you guys are memorizing the verse that comes on afterwards. And guys, keep up with the story. Thanksgiving's coming around the corner. I'm going to be giving the lessons. I'm going to even give a lesson on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So, hey, keep listening and hear how Esther finishes out her story. And if you see the dog running around, that is Sophie. Sophie surprised me today. Hey, we'll talk to you next time. See you next week. Hey, be good and be like Esther. Just following God and Mordecai. Bye. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. Philippians 2:13.